It happened behind closed doors, no cameras, no aides, no prepared statement. Just a sealed letter, a trembling hand, and a king who wasn't ready for what his own son had written. Within minutes of reading William's private words, King Charles reportedly broke down in a way the palace never allows the public to see. Not a polite tear, not a controlled sigh. A real collapse, and the terrifying question is, what did William say that could undo a king in seconds? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It starts with an envelope that never should have caused fear, yet somehow did. Marked simply private from William, it doesn't arrive like ordinary correspondence. It travels through an unusually strict chain of custody, passed hand to hand with the kind of caution reserved for classified material. No casual messenger, no open tray, no staff chatter. Just a quiet delivery that already suggests one thing: whatever is inside can't be allowed to move freely, because once it does, it can't be controlled again. Charles insists on reading it alone. That's the first crack in the royal routine. A king refusing the usual audience of aides and secretaries, rejecting the comforting presence of people trained to manage emotion and optics. For once, he wants privacy. That phrase alone carries weight, because it signals this is not ceremonial. This is personal, dangerous, and possibly irreversible. The door closes, the palace goes quiet, and for a few minutes the most powerful man in the institution is simply a father holding his son's words. The impact is immediate. No slow processing, no measured breathing. The reaction hits fast, like a blow to the chest. Charles is visibly shaken, struggling to keep composure in the only place he believes no one can see him fall apart. But composure doesn't last. Whatever William wrote doesn't sound like complaint or frustration. It reads like a point of no return. A line crossed. A truth finally put into ink because speaking it out loud would have been easier to deny. Rumors ignite almost instantly among the few who sense something has happened. They don't describe the letter as a request. They describe it as a boundary, or worse, an ultimatum. Not please, but enough. Not I hope, but I will. The kind of tone that tells a father, you can't manage this with soothing words, because your son has already decided what he's willing to tolerate. A trusted aide is forced to intervene when Charles's reaction becomes impossible to conceal. Not because Charles calls for help, but because the silence behind that closed door turns alarming. The aide steps in and finds what the palace never once witnessed: Charles in raw, uncontrolled distress. A real breakdown. Not staged, not calculated. The kind that happens when a lifetime of restraint collides with one sentence you can't unsee. And then a subtle detail slips into whispers, the kind that makes seasoned insiders go still. The letter references something promised long ago. A private pact, a vow between father and son. The implication is devastating. Whatever that promise was, it has been broken. Not by accident, but by choice. That's why Charles isn't just sad. He's exposed. Because William didn't just express pain, he reminded the king of a commitment he failed to keep. The palace begins containment almost immediately. That alone speaks volumes. They don't wait for confirmation. They don't ask questions out loud. They move as if the contents threaten stability and succession optics, as if one private letter can crack the careful image of unity the monarchy survives on. And hovering above everything is the most chilling cliffhanger of all. A line from the letter allegedly mentions what you did, and what you allowed. But Charles's breakdown wasn't the real shock. The real shock was what palace staff did next, because they moved like they were preparing for war. The moment Charles put the letter down, the palace didn't react like a family in crisis, it reacted like a government under threat. Phones went quiet. Doors became restricted. Staff were reassigned without explanation. And the most chilling part, nobody asked what the letter said out loud. They acted like they already knew. Because inside royal systems, some truths aren't discussed, they're contained. And William's words had just triggered the most dangerous containment protocol of all. Within minutes, the palace shifts into a different rhythm, one that doesn't belong to grief, but to control. Schedules are adjusted with no explanation. Corridors that were normally open become restricted. Staff are told to keep movements minimal, to avoid unnecessary contact, to act as though the building itself might leak. The language sounds polite, even reasonable, but the intention is clear: reduce witnesses, reduce chatter, reduce the number of people who can piece together what happened in that room. Then the wrong kind of person arrives. Not a press aide, not a public spokesperson. A crisis operator. The type who manages containment, not headlines. The type who doesn't comfort the king but protects the institution from whatever the king just learned. That alone is a signal that the threat is internal and severe. Because public storms are handled with statements. Internal storms are handled with restrictions, reassignment, and silence so heavy it feels enforced. The letter itself is treated like classified material, and nobody can confirm what happens to it. Is it copied? Logged? Secured? Removed? Everyone who might know suddenly speaks in careful fragments, as if the wrong word could end a career. That uncertainty becomes its own weapon, because if no one can confirm the letter's status, no one can challenge how it's being managed. And the palace loves what can't be confirmed. It's the perfect fog to hide behind. Charles's inner circle splits almost immediately, and the split is ruthless. One side moves around the king's health, focused on calming him, steadying him, making sure he appears well enough to function. The other side focuses on succession stability, because a shaken king can be managed, but a destabilized heir cannot. It's the oldest conflict in the royal machine, the man versus the monarchy, the father versus the crown. Then comes a subtle power shift that doesn't look dramatic until you understand what it means. William's office is contacted, but not through normal channels. Not through the expected courtiers, not through the usual diplomatic link. The message is routed differently, as if someone doesn't trust the standard lines anymore. It's a quiet admission that the system is bracing for William to act in a way they can't predict, and they want leverage before he has momentum. Whispered concern spreads through the staff like a fever no one is allowed to acknowledge. If William's letter becomes public, it could redefine the monarchy overnight. Not a scandal about a party or a remark, something deeper, something structural. The kind of revelation that changes how the public sees Charles, how they see William, and whether the institution feels united or broken. People who aren't usually afraid suddenly move like they are. Not because they care about gossip, because they care about survival. And then the emergency meeting is arranged fast, secretive, and selective. Only a few names are allowed. Others who should be present are deliberately excluded. That's when the dread becomes undeniable. This isn't just a response to an emotional breakdown. This is a strategic response to a threat. A threat they believe has a single source and a single direction: William. And while the palace tries to seal the story, one question grows louder. Why would William send something so devastating, unless he wanted it to change everything? William doesn't rush to the king's side. He doesn't issue a comforting message. He doesn't even deny the rumors. He stays silent, and that silence hits harder than any headline. Because when a future king chooses quiet after his father collapses, it doesn't look like compassion. It looks like calculation. And suddenly the question isn't just what William wrote, it's what William already decided before he wrote it. Reports place William at a separate residence, deliberately removed from the palace's tightening grip. And what shocks people isn't the distance, it's the timing. He allegedly refuses urgent calls until a specific hour, as if he's operating on a clock the palace doesn't control. That detail lands like a threat without a single aggressive word. When powerful families collapse, everyone scrambles. William doesn't scramble, he waits. And in that waiting, The palace starts to feel something it hates more than scandal: uncertainty. His team becomes a wall. No comment, no reassurance, no soft statement about family unity, just controlled distance, delivered with the cold professionalism of people who've prepared for this moment. The palace tries to reach him through familiar channels, but the responses come back measured and firm, as if William's office has decided the usual ritual of comfort is no longer safe or no longer useful. That alone makes insiders whisper the same thing in different ways. This isn't an emotional outburst from William. This is a strategy. Then the more unsettling hints begin to surface. People close to William suggest the letter wasn't written in a single night of anger. It took weeks, drafts, revisions, a slow sharpening of language until every line landed exactly where it needed to. That changes everything, because a letter written in fury can be forgiven as a moment. A letter written over weeks is a decision. It means William didn't just feel something, he concluded something. He resolved something. And his silence only deepens the dread. Is he waiting for Charles to make the first move? Is he letting the king sit with the consequences? Or is he forcing the palace to reveal its hand, watching who panics, who contains, who leaks, who lies? In the royal machine, silence can be mercy or warfare. Williams feels like the second one, and the emotional stakes rise with every hour he refuses to soothe the situation. Because now it looks like a son choosing duty over forgiveness, truth over loyalty, and protection over tradition. People who have always assumed William would endure anything for the crown suddenly wonder if that assumption was the palace's biggest mistake. And the whispers coming from William's circle don't sound apologetic. They sound final. It had to be said finally. That single phrase spreads like a match in dry grass, because it implies this wasn't about one incident. It was about years. A build-up, a breaking point reached and crossed. Then comes the cliffhanger detail that makes the palace's containment feel even more frantic. A source claims William included a document inside the letter, something Charles couldn't refute. Not a rumour, not a feeling. Proof. A timeline. A record, something that turns the letter from emotional confrontation into undeniable accusation. The kind that can't be smoothed over with family meetings and carefully worded statements. But the real turning point comes when we learn why William wrote the letter. Because it wasn't sparked by politics, it was sparked by betrayal. The letter didn't break Charles because it was angry. It broke him because it was specific. William didn't accuse vaguely, he named moments, meetings, and choices. Choices Charles made, and choices Charles avoided. And the most brutal part? William's words allegedly centered on one haunting claim, that Charles allowed something unforgivable to happen inside the royal machine, something William has spent years trying to protect his own family from. That's why Charles couldn't hide behind the usual royal defences. Not this time. Because a general complaint can be softened, explained away, reframed as tension. But specificity is a blade. It points, it cuts, it leaves nowhere to stand without bleeding. William didn't write like a son begging to be heard. He wrote like a man presenting evidence, laying out a case, showing his father exactly where the line was crossed and making it clear that the line wasn't crossed once. It was crossed repeatedly, with knowledge, with silence, with permission. According to whispers from inside the circle, William referenced a private incident Charles had once sworn would never repeat. Not something public. Not a tabloid storm. Something internal, something the palace treated like a sealed wound. The kind of trauma that never makes the official story, because it would force the institution to admit it can harm its own. William brought it back up not to reopen pain, but to expose a pattern. He allegedly wrote it in a way that made it impossible for Charles to pretend he didn't understand, because it wasn't framed as rumour, it was framed as memory, as promise, as betrayal. The letter, insiders claim, accused Charles of protecting the institution over people, especially over William's own household. That detail is what turns this from father-son tension into something darker. Because William isn't just arguing about policy or tradition, he's arguing about safety, about boundaries, about what a father should never sacrifice, no matter how heavy the crown feels. And in William's wording, it wasn't presented as a debate. It was presented as a failure that had consequences William has been quietly absorbing while the palace told itself everything was fine. Then comes the hardest line to read, the one that reportedly landed like a verdict: "You knew, and you let it continue." That sentence doesn't ask for understanding, it assigns responsibility. It implies forewarning, repeated warnings, ignored warnings, and a final moment where Charles chose calm optics over decisive action. William frames it as betrayal, not disagreement, because disagreement can coexist with love. Betrayal reshapes love into something dangerous and uncertain. A contested power player is hinted to be at the center of this: an advisor, a courtier, an inner circle figure with influence that doesn't appear on paper. Someone Charles refused to remove. Someone the palace protected because removing them would admit they never should have been there to begin with. William's letter, according to sources, doesn't just criticize this person, it criticizes Charles's willingness to keep them close, to tolerate them, to manage them instead of cutting them out. And in palace terms, management is always the word used when someone wants a problem to remain useful. William reportedly included a timeline of warnings he gave. Dates, meetings, messages, moments when he signaled danger, pushed for action, demanded change. And next to those warnings, he lists what happened instead: delays, reassurances, quiet promises that nothing would happen again. The pattern is devastating because it transforms the story from a sudden rupture into a slow suffocation. William didn't snap. He waited. He warned. He endured. And when nothing changed, he wrote the only thing the palace can't interrupt mid-sentence: a letter. The emotional high point, the part that allegedly broke Charles completely, is when William ties his mother's suffering to what's happening now: history repeating under new faces, the same machinery, the same instinct to prioritize the institution over the human cost. It's not just grief. It's accusation by comparison. It's William saying, in effect, that Charles watched Diana be consumed by the system and still didn't learn how to stop it when it threatened William's own family. And then comes the final line: quiet, brutal, irreversible. If you won't stop it, I will. And once that line exists, the monarchy can't pretend this is a private family matter, because it becomes a succession crisis. For years, the palace believed William would endure anything for the crown. That was their comfort. That was their leverage. But the private letter suggests something terrifying. William has a red line and Charles crossed it. The breakdown wasn't just grief, it was recognition. Because if William's letter contained what sources claim it did, then it wasn't just an emotional explosion, it was a warning shot aimed at the very structure of the monarchy. The shift happens the moment palace figures realize William isn't merely upset, he's prepared to act. And in royal terms, action doesn't mean an argument or a cold relationship. It means procedure. It means formal steps. It means consequences that don't disappear with a family lunch and a carefully staged photo. William allegedly makes it clear that if the issue isn't properly corrected, not managed, he will take a step that can't be quietly undone. The kind of step that hints at constitutional level impact, because when an heir draws a line publicly or formally, the institution has to respond whether it wants to or not. That threat alone triggers panic, not because the palace doubts William's influence, but because it understands it too well. Optics become a battlefield overnight. If Charles looks weak, William looks powerful. But if William looks powerful while the king looks shaken, the monarchy looks divided. And division is the one image the palace cannot afford, because it invites questions. No one can control questions from the public, from parliament, from media, from every corner of a nation that watches royal stability like it's national weather. Inside the senior circle, the debate turns sharp and immediate: containment or reconciliation. One camp wants to seal the situation, keep it private, steady the king, and prevent William from turning this into a public fracture. The other camp knows containment won't work if William's letter contains evidence, timelines, or proof that can surface at any moment. They argue for reconciliation not out of love, but out of fear that William's silence is the calm before a move the palace won't be able to stop. Then a phrase from William's letter begins to ripple through whispers like a spark searching for oxygen. "I'm not alone anymore." Whether those exact words were written or simply implied, the meaning hits the same. William has support, not just emotional support, but alignment. People willing to stand behind his stance. That detail terrifies the old guard, because an isolated heir can be managed. An heir with backing becomes a force. And the letter's tone, according to insiders, reinforces the most dangerous reality of all. William is willing to prioritize his household over royal unity publicly, if necessary. That's a fundamental rewrite of the palace's expectations. The institution survives when family members accept personal sacrifice as duty. William's message suggests the opposite. Duty now means protecting his family from the institution's failures. And once that philosophy exists in writing, the palace's traditional leverage begins to crack. The dread grows into something colder when senior figures begin whispering about a controlled transition. Not an immediate abdication, not a public announcement, but a strategic reshaping of authority earlier than planned, before the situation erupts. Because if William is forcing change, the palace would rather orchestrate it than be dragged into it. The monarchy can survive change. What it can't survive is change that looks like defeat. And then the cliffhanger lands like a blade. Someone leaks that William's letter was copied before delivery, meaning it can't be erased. If that's true, then containment is a fantasy. The words are out there. The truth is portable. And whoever holds that copy holds the power to decide when this becomes public warfare. But if that leak is real, the next question is terrifying. Who benefits from exposing William's words, and who wants Charles to fall? Once whispers of William's letter escaped the palace walls, it stopped being a family crisis and became a weapon. Because leaks don't happen by accident at that level, they happen because someone wants the world to know, or wants the world to misunderstand. Suddenly, it's not just Charles and William in danger, it's everyone around them. And the most dangerous person isn't the one who wrote the letter, it's the one who controls how the letter is used. The palace fractures into factions the moment the first whisper lands in the wrong ear. One side pushes a story that William attacked the king, an emotional assault, a reckless act, proof the heir is unstable under pressure. The other side pushes the opposite. William intervened, forcing accountability, acting as the responsible protector of the future. Both narratives are designed to lead the public to a conclusion before the truth can breathe. Because in royal warfare, perception isn't a reflection of power. Perception is power. A senior operator moves quietly through the system, trying to track the chain of custody. Who handled the envelope? Who logged it? Who had access for even 30 seconds? Who entered the room? Who left? Who spoke? The operator isn't looking for gossip. They're looking for an act of sabotage. Because if the letter was copied before delivery, that means the leak wasn't an accident, it was a breach. And breaches at this level don't happen without intent. Someone wanted a copy floating in the shadows, ready to surface at the perfect moment. Suspicions spread fast, and they spread strategically. Some point fingers at rival households, implying internal rivalry has turned poisonous. Others blame advisors, the unseen hands who always survive because they never appear on camera. And then there's the old guard, loyalists who believe the monarchy survives only if William stays controlled, compliant, contained. Those people don't fear scandal as much as they fear change. A letter that suggests William is ready to act is a threat to their entire world. The media war begins in the same instant, not with full leaks, but with hints. Anonymous quotes. Carefully chosen lines that paint William as ruthless or righteous depending on who is whispering. Selective truths become bullets. A phrase here, a detail there, enough to steer public emotion without revealing the full document. And every headline becomes a battlefield where the palace tries to win without ever admitting it's fighting. The emotional tension is weaponized too. William's grief is reframed as instability, as if feeling deeply is evidence of unfitness. The very pain that makes the story human is turned into a political smear. And it works because the public has always been trained to see royal emotion as weakness, unless it's carefully packaged. The palace knows that. So do the people who want William softened, delayed, or discredited. Charles's vulnerability becomes a lever, and different hands try to pull it in different directions. Some want him to retreat, less visibility, fewer appearances, let the storm pass. Others want him to strike back, to reassert authority before William's narrative hardens into fact. But every option carries a cost. If Charles hides, he looks weak. If Charles retaliates, he looks cruel. And if William stays silent, he looks powerful. Then the most chilling whisper surfaces, the one that changes the shape of the entire crisis. A source claims there's a second letter one Charles wrote back but never sent. That detail hits like a locked door suddenly rattling from the inside, because if Charles wrote a reply in the heat of collapse and never released it, that means there's something he wanted to say but couldn't risk saying. A confession, a denial, a warning, or an admission too damaging to exist in public. And that unseen reply might be the most explosive document of all, because it reveals what Charles knows and what he's been hiding. The most haunting twist in this story isn't William's letter, it's the letter Charles reportedly wrote after reading it. A reply that never left his desk. A reply filled with words no king is supposed to say out loud. Because while William's letter delivered judgment, Charles's response, according to whispers, carried something else. Confession. Not just regret. Not just sadness. A quiet admission that William was right about one terrifying thing, and that the palace has been lying longer than anyone realized. Charles drafts it in emotional isolation, refusing formal advisors the way a drowning man refuses spectators. That decision alone is a tell. Kings don't write alone when the stakes are manageable. They write alone when the words are too dangerous to be witnessed in real time. He doesn't want edits. He doesn't want diplomacy. He doesn't want anyone shaping the tone into something safe. He wants the page to take what he can't say aloud without the crown cracking around him. Those who claim to know about the reply describe it as personal, not royal. Not a monarch issuing guidance, but a father breaking discipline. It reads like someone trying to speak to his son before the machine swallows the moment again. There are no grand declarations, no polished phrases for the public. Instead, there's vulnerability raw enough to feel almost forbidden. Charles doesn't defend himself the way the palace would. He doesn't lead with tradition. He leads with a wound. And then comes the line that reportedly cuts deepest. Charles acknowledges a past promise and admits it was broken for the institution. That phrase is devastating because it's the exact language William was accusing him of living by. It isn't "I forgot." It isn't "I didn't know." It's "I chose." A quiet admission that he traded a vow for stability, believing stability was the greater good. It's the kind of confession that doesn't absolve him, it indicts him with his own hand. Charles hints at forces inside the royal structure he couldn't control or wouldn't confront. He writes as if the palace has its own gravity, pulling decisions into compromise until compromise becomes policy. He suggests there were moments he tried to push back, moments he tried to stop something from repeating, but the resistance was stronger than he expected. Or perhaps he was weaker than he wanted to admit. The difference matters, and the letter reportedly leaves that ambiguity hanging like smoke. The reply reveals something even darker. Charles fears William might burn it all down to save his family. That fear isn't an insult to William, it's a recognition of William's resolve. It's Charles admitting he sees his son's red line clearly now, and that once crossed, William won't negotiate with sentiment. He'll act. The tragedy is that Charles seems to understand that strength while also fearing what it could do to the institution he spent his life protecting. Then comes the most devastating implication of all. One line suggests Charles has known a key truth for years. Not suspected, not wondered, known. The kind of knowledge that makes every public smile feel heavier in hindsight, every speech sound like performance, every attempt at unity look like strategy. If that line exists as described, it means the letter isn't just emotional fallout, it's proof the monarchy's internal story has been managed longer than anyone outside the walls ever imagined. And finally, the cliffhanger phrase that reportedly haunts everyone who hears it: "I tried to stop it, but I was too late." Too late for what? Too late to protect Diana's legacy? Too late to shield William's family? Too late to prevent the institution from becoming what William now refuses to tolerate? The sentence doesn't answer. It only admits failure. And if Charles truly believes he was too late, then the final question becomes unavoidable. What happens next? When William refuses to wait? There's a moment in every royal crisis where silence becomes a decision. And William, faced with a father who broke down instead of fixing the problem, reaches that moment fast. This isn't about revenge. It's about survival, his family's survival, and maybe the monarchy's too. Because when William chooses action, he isn't just defying his father. He's redefining what it means to be the next king, and daring the palace to stop him. The shift is felt before it's announced, like pressure changing in a sealed room. William stops reacting and starts directing. He prepares a decisive step that isn't meant to comfort anyone, it's meant to force movement. Insiders describe it as a private ultimatum meeting, or a formal internal action that can't be brushed aside with polite phrases. Either way, the message is the same. This will no longer be managed as a family disagreement. It will be handled as a threat to the future of his household and the integrity of the institution itself. William's demands, according to those close to the situation, are not negotiable. Removals, protections, structural changes, the kind of conditions that expose exactly where the palace has been hiding its rot. He isn't asking for assurances, he's demanding outcomes. Names moved out of influence. Access tightened. Certain channels shut down. A line drawn through the old method of handling crises: containment, silence, delay, because delay is how damage becomes permanent. William's stance makes one brutal thing clear: if the palace protects the wrong people, it will lose the right one. Palace leadership scrambles to prevent a public rupture, and their first instinct is compromise. Meetings are suggested, middle ground solutions offered. Let's calm this down, let's handle this quietly. Let's protect unity. But William doesn't accept unity as a substitute for safety. He rejects soft solutions with a cold clarity that stuns even seasoned insiders. No more containment. Those words, simple and sharp, are essentially a declaration of war against the palace's favorite weapon. The emotional climax doesn't come from shouting. It comes from William's framing. He ties this moment directly to the cycle that destroyed Diana, not just her suffering, but the palace's habit of prioritizing image over the human cost. He makes it personal in the most dangerous way, not by pleading as a son, but by speaking as a future king who believes the institution is risking its own legitimacy. The implication is brutal and unavoidable. If the monarchy cannot protect the heir's family from internal harm, then the monarchy is failing its core purpose. That forces Charles into the most painful choice of his reign: Protect the institution's old guard, those who survived by controlling narratives and outlasting storms, or protect his heir, the man who represents the monarchy's future and the stability they claim to defend. Charles can't do both anymore. William's letter already made sure of that. William's action makes it impossible to pretend otherwise. And then the last-minute report lands like a match near fuel. William has already secured support for his move. Not just emotional support, strategic support. The kind that turns a private demand into a real shift in power. The kind that suggests William isn't walking into this alone. He's walking in backed, prepared, and ready to follow through. And the moment that support becomes real, the monarchy enters its most dangerous phase, because now, the fight isn't behind closed doors, it's on the edge of becoming public. The palace can survive scandal. It can survive criticism. It can even survive heartbreak. But it cannot survive an heir and a king at war in full view of the world. That's why everyone is terrified of one thing: William's letter going public in full. Because if the public reads what broke Charles, it won't just change opinions, it will change power. And once that happens, there's no undoing it. The moment the possibility of a full leak becomes real, the monarchy's story splits in two. On one side, sympathy for Charles, the image of a king shaken by his son's words, a father collapsing under the weight of personal failure and public duty. On the other side, trust in William's leadership, an heir seen as decisive, protective, unwilling to tolerate the palace's old habits. And once the public starts choosing sides, the institution loses its most valuable asset, the illusion of unity. You can survive criticism when you look together. You can't survive it when the nation starts watching you fracture. Political consequences begin to ripple even before the truth is confirmed. Quiet pressure builds around Parliament, not because lawmakers want to intervene, but because public pressure forces them to respond to instability at the top. Demonstrations become possible. Media storms become inevitable. Every journalist, every commentator, every rival voice senses the same thing. This isn't a typical royal drama. It's a power confrontation wrapped in grief, and it's exactly the kind of story that can reshape loyalty overnight. And what makes it worse is how quickly private pain becomes a national debate. People stop asking, "What happened?" and start asking, "Who deserves loyalty?" Do you stand with the king who represents tradition and continuity, even if he failed to confront the rot inside the system? Or do you stand with the heir who seems willing to burn through old protections to shield his family and force reform? The family's grief becomes a public referendum, and every argument feels personal because Diana's shadow still hangs over it all like unfinished history. Inside the palace, panic turns into strategy. A controlled disclosure is quietly considered not because they want transparency, but because they fear chaos more. If the full letter is going to surface anyway, better to shape the narrative first. Better to release a softened version, a measured excerpt, a carefully contextualized explanation, anything to prevent the public from reading William's raw words without palace framing. But that tactic carries its own danger. Controlled disclosure is still disclosure, and once you open the door, you can't control what comes through it. William's popularity versus institutional loyalty becomes the new battlefield. If the public sees William as the moral center and Charles as the weak link, the monarchy's internal balance shifts in ways the palace cannot undo. But if William is framed as aggressive, unstable, or disloyal, the institution buys itself time. That's why every whisper matters now, every leak, every planted phrase, every anonymous source. Because in this phase, the fight isn't about the letter alone, it's about who gets to define what the letter means. Then the final twist detonates everything. A mysterious third party claims to possess the full letter and threatens release. Not a palace insider, not an official channel, someone outside the machine. Someone who can't be silenced by protocol or intimidated by royal tradition. The message is simple chilling, and dangerously believable, the letter is already beyond palace reach. Which means containment is dead. Control is dead. The only question left is timing and who profits when the words finally hit daylight. And the story ends on the most viral question of all, the one that turns a family crisis into a historical turning point. Did William write the letter to save the monarchy, or to end the version of it Charles built? And as the palace braces for impact, one truth becomes unavoidable. The most dangerous words in the monarchy aren't spoken on balconies. They're written in private letters no one was meant to see. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.